On that night in May 1873, the Richtors slipped out of Milwaukee like ghosts, leaving behind a house with 2 cold beds, a half-finished loaf of bread, and curtains that stirred in the lake wind as though waving a farewell no one would see. To the quarter, they would become a story, a whispered warning about the danger of a child who could know too much. But Emma Richtor's story did not end in Milwaukee, nor did the strange, terrible clarity of the world as she saw it. Far north in Minnesota, the family tried to rebuild a life, but the quiet tide of Emma's calculations followed them. Her mind, relentless as clockwork, did not rest, not even for a breath. And though Milwaukee faded behind them, the numbers never did. They never would. For 26 months, she began, I have been recording the movements and behavioral patterns of 43 adults in the quarter. The data is complete enough now to reveal the larger pattern. Her voice, though soft, seemed to hollow the room. These 7 men meet every Wednesday at midnight in the basement of Kellner's brewery. She listed their names with clinical detachment. Weber, Steinberg, Kellner's brother Hans, Zimmerman's cousin Otto, their neighbors Kruger and Wolf, and Brennan, the late husband of Mrs. Brennan, until his death 3 months earlier. Hinrich felt the room constrict. How can you possibly know this? He whispered, though he already knew the answer. I observed their deviations, Emma replied. Their statements of where they were, compared with where they actually went. Their spending patterns, their behaviors afterward. She turned the page. Maps of the quarter were marked with routes and times. Columns of figures showed discrepancies in brewery production, ingredient shipments, and money spent. Taken individually, the notes were harmless enough. Together, they were a tapestry of guilt. The 7 men have stolen approximately $47,000 worth of beer and materials over the past 26 months, she said. The theft required someone with access to financial records. The data indicates that Ernst Kellner coordinated the operation. Hinrich sat back slowly, his hands trembling. In Milwaukee, $47,000 was not merely theft, it was a fortune. Enough to ruin breweries, families, and reputations. Enough to provoke murderous desperation. And Emma, he swallowed. You are certain? The probability exceeds 96%, she said quietly. They believe they have hidden their crimes, but their patterns betray them. She turned another page, and the air seemed to chill. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Kellner began behaving irregularly. Twice he stood outside our house at night for 17 minutes. That duration suggests contemplation or hesitation. His pattern indicates he believes I have observed his activities. Hinrich's breath caught. He knows you're watching. Emma nodded. And because of this, she continued, my calculations show an 84% probability that he or one of the others will act against our family. The most likely time frame is within 72 hours. There was no emotion in her voice, only the cold clarity of a mind that could see danger unfolding long before it arrived. Greta entered the room then, drying her hands on her apron, unaware of the doom spoken aloud in her absence. But she read it instantly on her husband's face. It's time, Hinrich said softly. We leave tonight. He did not wait to explain. He only gathered Emma's journal, packed what little they owned, and hurried them through preparations made in secret over the past weeks. When dusk fell, he left the house once more, clutching the journal tightly, to seek help. There was only one man he trusted enough to involve, Dr. Friedrich Müller. The doctor listened under the dim lamplight of his office, flipping through the pages with growing disbelief and dread. This is evidence," he whispered, "more thorough than any investigator could have compiled. These calculations. Heinrich, if this became known, if Kellner learned the extent of your daughter's notes—" "He already knows," Heinrich said. "Or he suspects." Dr. Müller stood abruptly. "We must move quickly." He had contacts, strands of connection that ran beyond the quarter, beyond Milwaukee. Within an hour, he had arranged safe passage for the Richters. A brewer in New Ulm needed an experienced hand. A wagon, under the guise of a medical errand, could carry them unseen. By midnight, the family was bundled beneath blankets in the back of Dr. Müller's wagon. The streets slept around them. No dogs barked, no windows lit. The quarter seemed to hold its breath. As they rolled past the brewery, Emma opened her eyes from the half-sleep she had drifted into. "Papa," she murmured softly, "in 6 months, the theft will be discovered anyway. 3 of the 7 men will not survive the investigation." Heinrich felt her words like ice water poured down his spine. Even now, especially now, she calculated outcomes. She mapped the fates of men they were struggling to escape. He hoped she was wrong. She wasn't. By winter, federal authorities uncovered the full conspiracy. Kellner was arrested and sentenced. 3 of his accomplices died, 1 by suicide, 1 by misadventure, 1 by a sudden and questionable illness. And just as Emma had predicted, the timeline matched her calculations exactly. But that was all in the future. Science could not, however, undo the ripple of dread or reclaim the weary threads of neighborliness. The Richtor family's ostracism calcified. Emma's journal thickened. She began to build probability matrices, tables that ran columns of variables and rows of outcomes, predicting sequences of events weeks ahead. The pages contained not just observations, but inferences. Who traveled, who made sudden purchases, who altered their steps. The book itself was an act of accumulation, of memory made permanent. And the community, when it looked at that accumulation, when it considered, as a collective, the idea of being knowable, grew savage with small cruelties. Children who had been friends now pulled away. Mrs. Brennan crossed the street rather than return Heinrich's nod. The brewery men made phrases thin and careful in taverns. Heinrich's own position wavered. A man whose daughter is spoken of in the same breath as doom is not easily trusted with the brewery's secrets. Meanwhile, Emma's compass of attention sharpened still more. She saw patterns that braided scandal and sorrow. She cataloged them and set probabilities against them. It was not that she wished harm. She seemed almost incapable of wishing anything at all. But the cold accuracy of her mind forced the community to reckon with the consequences of its own habits. One Tuesday in late April, the numbers pointed at another kind of darkness. Emma announced that Mrs. Brennan had left her house at an unusual time and walked toward the river. Her step length shortened, her breathing irregular. The statistical patterns she had compiled in her head indicated an 87% probability of self-harm within hours. Greta felt the floor tilt beneath her. Heinrich ran, driven by a terror that was part belief and part paternal instinct. He found Margaret Brennan on the dock, a thin figure absorbed by the dark water. He spoke to her with the clumsy tenderness of a man who had been taught to fix boilers and vats, not broken hearts. For 2 hours he talked her down from the edge, unspooling small certainties into a fragile remnant of hope, until she agreed to return, to sleep, to let time dilute her despair. That intervention altered Emma's calculation, as Emma noted the next night with anatomical detachment. "The variables have changed," she said. "Third-party interference reduces the likelihood by 37%. I will adjust." Hinrich could not write the look that came over his daughter's face. There was no gratitude, no relief, only the patient revision of an equation. He understood then that whatever she was, she did not process suffering as others did. He and Greta began to make plans they had once thought cowardly, quietly to leave Milwaukee before whatever came next could be bought by violence. But departures require decisions, and decisions take time. Emma continued to record. She continued to watch. Every entry in the journal tightened the noose of knowledge around their small family and around the neighborhood that resented being reduced to numbers. And somewhere behind those graphite lines, other eyes watched back. Men who had reasons to fear exposure and who understood, with a practical cruelty, what must be done to silence a witness whose ledger might undo them all. The soft, thin light of May would bring them to a precipice. The pages of Emma's journal were full now, dense with the arithmetic of a community on the edge. What she would reveal next would not be an affair or a fire, but a pattern of theft and conspiracy that cut straight to the heart of the breweries that fed their streets. It would be a revelation that made theirs a life it was no longer safe to lead. On the first morning of May, the sun rose weakly over the German quarter, illuminating its rows of tidy homes with a pale, indecisive light. The air still held the cool bite of early spring, but something else moved beneath it. An unease so subtle that only those who had lived through the long winter of gossip and fear could feel it pressing against their windows. That morning, the Richtor house was quiet. Greta kneaded dough with trembling hands. Hinrich packed crates in the small pantry, trying to disguise the urgency of his movements. They were preparing to leave, though they hadn't yet found the courage to tell Emma. But it was Emma who broke the silence. "Papa," she said, her tone as calm as ever, "I need to show you something." She carried her journal under her arm, its leather spine swollen from weeks of relentless calculation. Hinrich hesitated before sitting at the table across from her, as though taking his place in front of some terrible instrument of truth. Emma opened the book to a new section. Charts, figures, and maps rendered in small, neat handwriting that belied the gravity of their content. The next day, the prediction unfolded with a terrible, almost surgical inevitability. Wilhelm Weber found his wife with Ernst Kellner in the brewery office. The confrontation was ugly and unrestrained. Kellner left with a broken nose and 3 cracked ribs. Anna Weber was beaten until Dr. Müller, called in from his evening rounds, patched her wounds by lamplight. The neighborhood vibrated with indignation and fascination. People clustered in doorways and behind curtains, trading versions of the story. But in the silences between the gossiping, another colder thought took hold. Emma had told them this would happen. Scandal spread like oil over still water. The brewery men whispered about morality and the devil. Women crossed streets to avoid the Richtor stoop. Hinrich's evenings at the Kellner brewery grew solitary. Colleagues fell silent when he entered. Kellner himself, nursing his injured face, made it plain he did not want the Richtor family at company gatherings again. Where once the Richtors had been ordinary, they were now a subject, a cautionary tale. Emma took no comfort in being infamous. She continued to sit at her place by the window and write. The leather-bound journal became a private cosmos of rows and columns, dates and measures, sketches of streets annotated with tiny numerals. Her parents dared not read what she wrote. Greta could not bear to imagine her daughter cataloging the failings of neighbors as if they were specimens under glass. Then came the fire. A prediction of different color, but the same relentless clarity. "There will be a fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday at 8:47, Emma announced one sober evening. "It will spread to 3 adjacent buildings before the brigade can respond. Mr. Zimmerman will not survive." Hinrich listened, as if the room had tilted. Emma listed the reasons as if quoting from a ledger. Purchases of lamp oil in unwanted quantity, whiskey mixed with kerosene observed in the kitchen, a wife absent in Chicago, structural decay in the chimney indicated by the angle and color of smoke. Each observation was pared down to its arithmetical skeleton. Greta wept in the pantry. Hinrich could not accept such fatalism. He took the small risk of attempting prevention. He found Mr. Zimmerman the evening before the fire, and his warning, delivered in a man's blunt, frightened voice, was met with laughter and slurred mockery. Still, the man promised, roughly and unsteadily, to be more careful. The next evening, the spring air was dry, and the wind came from the west. At 8:47, fire took the Zimmerman kitchen with brutal speed. 3 neighboring homes were swallowed before the volunteer brigade could marshal a coherent response. Zimmerman's body was found where the flames had taken him, fallen, perhaps felled, trying to fight a blaze that roared too hot, too quickly. Once again, the precision of Emma's timing unnerved the quarter. Hinrich's attempt at intervention did not alter the fact of the prediction. It only altered its calculus. The difference between foreknowledge and responsibility. The Richtors were increasingly treated as portents. Children were instructed not to play near their house. Shopkeepers hurried the family past counters. Sermons passed without visits to their doorstep. Father Caller, once quick to bless, kept his distance in an awkward way that suggested fear rather than piety. Dr. Friedrich Müller, however, did not cross himself or mutter about witchcraft. Educated in Berlin and trained to view the mind with clinical curiosity, he approached Hinrich with a careful offer. "Bring Emma to my office." Scientific curiosity, when mixed with compassion, can be a dangerous thing. It leads to questions that stir the ash of rumor into flame. Hinrich, desperate and exhausted, agreed. The examination took place on a rainy Thursday above the pharmacy on Water Street. Emma answered the physician's questions with the same soft certainty she brought to all things. She explained her method, that people, like tides, had regularities, that deviations were the arithmetic of crisis. Dr. Müller probed gently, watching her eyes as he asked about sleep, about appetite, about whether she felt afraid of what she saw. Emma replied without drama. She observed, counted, and adjusted probabilities. Her eyes never revealed dread, only a calculative cool. Afterward, Dr. Müller spoke with Hinrich and Greta in low, urgent tones. "This is neurological," he said, his hand steady on their shoulder. "Not spectral. Her mind organizes information in a way that is precise, almost mechanical. We have no simple label, but there is nothing supernatural here I can see." The day was gray, brittle with frost. Emma sat at the kitchen table eating porridge while her mother packed a tin lunch for Hinrich. Without warning, Emma looked up, her voice flat and certain. "Mr. Dietrich will not return home tonight. He will die at 14 minutes past 2. Greta froze, the tin pail slipping in her hands. "Emma, don't speak like that. Why would you say such a thing?" Emma blinked once, slow and serene. "He has been drinking from the small brown bottle for 17 days. Yesterday he drank 3 times more than usual. His steps were uneven, 251 instead of 244. When patterns change by more than 10%, something significant happens within 72 hours. His change is 12. The calculation is simple. Hinrich's coat halted halfway up his arm. He stared at his daughter, throat tightening. Yes, Dietrich drank. Many men did. But the idea that Emma had counted his steps every day without fail and charted his decline with mathematical certainty was enough to chill the soul. They scolded her, of course, told her not to speak of death, told her to keep such thoughts to herself. Emma nodded and finished her meal in silence. But at 14 minutes past 2, Johann Dietrich collapsed in the malt room. Heart failure, the doctor said. Alcohol poisoning. The men who found him spoke of strange behavior, of his nervousness, of the grim inevitability that seemed to follow him those last days. Yet it was the timing that everyone remembered. The minute, the precision. Word traveled quickly in a place as tightly woven as the German quarter. Whispers trailed the Richtors like smoke. Coincidence, some said. A child's guess, others insisted. But those who had seen Emma watching, counting, began to wonder what other secrets she carried behind those gray, unblinking eyes. The family felt the shift immediately. Church pews grew emptier around them. Neighbors' smiles stiffened. Children crossed streets rather than pass near Emma. Even Father Koller, who once praised her as a vessel of God's wisdom, now avoided her gaze. Hinrich, torn between love and fear, confronted her gently one evening. "Emma, how did you know?" She looked at him as though the answer were obvious. "I watch. I count. I remember." Mr. Dietrich's decline fit the parameters. And what parameters are those? His drinking increased by 37%. His meals decreased by 20%. It is enough. She said it all plainly, without malice, without feeling. It was this lack of emotion, this perfect coldness, that frightened Heinrich more than any prediction. "Emma," he whispered, "I don't want to hear any more of these calculations." She simply nodded, but the numbers did not stop forming in her mind, and she was not finished watching. The weeks after Dietrich's death settled over the neighborhood with the heaviness of damp wool. People walked faster past the Richtor home. Curtains twitched. Conversations halted mid-breath when Emma appeared, and yet she kept her place by the window. She kept counting. She kept knowing. And soon, she would reveal another secret and set in motion a chain of events that no calculation could contain. She did not stop at small observations. Patterns, once perceived, began to weave themselves into explanations she could not help but voice. The first of these greater revelations arrived like a shard of glass, precise, clean, and cutting. One afternoon, while peeling potatoes, Emma looked up at her mother and recited, without preface or shame, a series of facts that read like a ledger of infidelity. Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence. Greta's knife clattered to the floor. Heinrich, standing in the doorway, felt the color drain from his face. Children's gossip and tavern rumor had their predictable currents, but the way Emma spoke removed any notion of rumor. This was a sequence of events, calculated and inevitable. "She has been arriving 7 minutes earlier each week for 6 weeks, Emma went on methodically. Mr. Kellner stays 33 minutes later each day. Mr. Weber will return 47 minutes early because his horse's lameness will slow his route. Those 3 variables converge." Hinrich wanted to curse, to deny, to batter the numbers from his daughter's mouth. But he had seen her count the Weber's deliveries, watched her mark the gait of the cart horse as it came down Galena Street. She had an index of small facts that, when multiplied together, grew into catastrophe. In the winter of 1873, The German quarter of Milwaukee murmured a single name with a kind of fearful reverence, as if speaking it too loudly might summon something they did not wish to face. Emma Richtor. 11 years old, pale as river ice, quiet as snowfall, and gifted or afflicted with a mind that seemed to run on its own hidden machinery. She could tell you the day of the week for any date whispered to her, no matter how distant. She repeated conversations after hearing them once, mimicking cadence and breath as though she were replaying a recording. She knew the number of steps between any place and any other, her memory mapping the neighborhood with eerie precision. To a modern eye, her brilliance might look like the rare flowering of a mind wired differently. But in 1873, people looked for angels and devils, not diagnoses. And when Emma began to speak of things she should not have known, private betrayals, hidden sins, and the shadows of tragedies not yet unfolded, Milwaukee's admiration curdled slowly into fear. By the thaw of spring, 3 men were dead. A family had slipped away without goodbye, and the child at the center of it all vanished, leaving behind only a leather-bound journal so dense with numbers that no one dared to decipher it. Before the disappearance, before the deaths and the whispered horrors, there was simply a neighborhood doing its best to survive the cold. Milwaukee's German quarter was a compact, close-stitched world of breweries, bakeries, and small wooden houses pressed against one another like rows of worn teeth. Nearly 8,000 immigrants called it home, bringing with them the familiar rhythms of Bavaria, the clatter of beer wagons, the scent of rye bread cooling by open windows, the murmur of German drifting through the crisp Wisconsin air. Heinrich and Greta Richtor had arrived there 12 years earlier, carrying their infant daughter across the Atlantic in the bitter storms of 1861. Heinrich found work as a brewmaster at the Kellner Brewery, a steady position, though it left him weary and smelling of yeast each night. Greta earned coins by washing linens and mending sleeves by candlelight, her thin fingers pricked raw by needles and soap. They were ordinary people, hard-working, content, and largely unnoticed. Except for Emma. She had entered the world too early, too small, birthed in the middle of the Atlantic with waves crashing like thunder on the ship's hull. The doctor had shaken his head, convinced she would not last the week. But Emma survived, though she remained narrow and pale, with enormous gray eyes that unsettled even those who loved her. Eyes that seemed too old, too knowing, too quiet. As a toddler, she demanded nothing. She preferred corners, silence, observation. While other children cried or reached for toys, Emma simply watched, absorbing the world around her with unnerving attentiveness. By 4, the strangeness became impossible to ignore. She repeated conversations she was not meant to hear, imitating the speakers' voices with eerie accuracy. She counted everything: steps, stitches, the minutes between the brewery whistles. When Heinrich taught her arithmetic, she consumed the lessons faster than he could think them through. Problems that took him minutes to set down on paper, she solved in seconds. The neighbors did not know what to make of her. Old Mrs. Brennan crossed herself each time the child's gaze settled on her for too long, muttering stories of witches her grandmother once spoke of. Father Collar, the stout priest who shepherded the community with more cheer than fire, declared the girl blessed, chosen by God to reveal his mysteries. Yet even he hesitated before meeting her direct, unblinking stare. Then came the hard winter of 1872, when the lake froze for the first time in a generation. The brewery men stamped their boots beside coal stoves, breath clouding the air inside their own homes. Women rationed food, wrapped children in layer after layer, and prayed for the thaw. It was during this long, isolated season that Emma's gift, if one could call it that, grew darker. She watched the neighbors with the same focus she applied to numbers. By the small kitchen window, she cataloged their routines. Who walked where? Who lingered? Who hurried? Who deviated from their usual path? She noticed patterns hidden within movements ordinary eyes would never question. How Mr. Kruger always took 247 steps to the brewery, unless it was Wednesday, when he took 284. How Mrs. Fisher arranged laundry on the line differently depending on whether her husband worked late. At first, she simply shared these facts, reciting them with the calm indifference of someone observing weather. Unusual, yes, but harmless. Until the morning in February when her observations shifted into something else entirely.